Good morning and welcome to the 69th episode of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. I'm Austin Holmes, your host and a developer at Dominium and a member of Dallas Housing Coalition Steering Committee. Today, we are joined by Trey Curtis, Chief Revenue Officer at Reconstruction Group. He is a strategic, influential, and responsive sales and business development leader with over 20 years of progressive business development and executive sales management experience. In his role, he leverages communications, interpersonal negotiation, and management skills to provide affordable housing solutions, commercial reconstruction, and multifamily and senior living renovations for all. A native Texan, Trey is a proud Fighting Texas Aggie, class of 2002, and holds a degree in business administration. Welcome to the Housing for All webinar, Trey.
Thank you, Austin. Appreciate you guys having me today.
For sure, for sure. We really appreciate you taking the time out, for sure. So let's get right into it. Dallas's population has grown tremendously over the past few decades. How has this impacted your business? And do you think our region and municipalities are doing enough to prepare for the population growth that is still to come?
Well, it's a loaded question, if you will, right? I think you could say it in general for the state of Texas as a whole, but Dallas is right there in the top of where folks are moving on a daily basis. I think last week I saw some numbers on a per day basis. It's roughly 300 people moving to Dallas per day. And we're on track to be the third biggest metroplex or city in the country here in very short order, right under LA and New York. And with that being said, what really happens is, that shows up directly in our work with more multifamily communities being built and acquired. And then a lot of them that are moving into those renovation cycles through age and looking to go back through a program to be sustainable for 15 years. And with that, also with us and, even in these affordable housing communities, from the maintenance and recovery perspective too, we're seeing a lot of work on our end in regards to unfortunate fires that happen, floods, et cetera, et cetera. So in short, Dallas, I believe we're very fortunate to have strong housing authorities within our community. Precision Reconstruction has done extensive work with DHA over the years, and having a strong housing authority within your community is always helpful, where across the country that's not always the case, right?
Definitely.
But each one of those communities is that goes up every day is a future reconstruction job in our eyes.
Yeah.
And with Precision Reconstruction, that's really our focus. We do not do ground up construction on our perspective alone. We do work with developers on some of the trades that are involved, but looking across the metroplex, there's a lot of opportunities for some of these aging assets, and also being creative on existing structures that can be converted into affordable housing communities and units.
That's really amazing, Trey. I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's something that an aspect of the overall housing solution that we really do need to spend a little more time on and think about is really kind of that preservation side of it, the reconstruction side of it. Because yes, it's incredibly important for us to build a lot of new units, from the ground up. But it's kind of like, what good does that do if at the same time we're losing units that could be serving families because we're not doing what we need to preserve them or preserve them in a way that allows them to still be affordable. So, yeah. But in
Exactly.
that vein, from a reconstruction standpoint, what are a few things that our audience and maybe the general public, might just overlook or misunderstand about really what, kind of that art of preserving the existing housing stock that we have here today?
Sure. And just to close the loop on that one, when we do see some of these current affordable housing communities that are, being leveled and going to the ground, 99 times out of 100, those particular communities, they do not come back as an affordable product, right? And then your question and kind of how has it changed?
Yeah.
Just in short order, 5 or 6 years ago, we were chasing folks, owners, developers, etc., housing authorities, where it was an individual property, right? Where it's just a one here, a one here. Now
Mhm.
you're seeing extensive acquisitions as a whole portfolio level, and
Okay.
that can be as small as 4 communities. And we've seen some of these portfolios be in the 12, 15, 20 community perspective, and then renovating those in waves. It's changed a lot the way that we as an organization have to staff and bid these, because as you can imagine, when you get a portfolio thrown in your lap as an opportunity for rehabilitation and affordable housing, that's a heavy lift. And just through sheer numbers, that's 10 to 15x of the work and what you have to prepare to be suitable for an appropriate proposal, within their budget to make things happen.
Mhm.
And that's something we've really seen. We continue to see across the board. And from a company like Dominium or some of the other folks across the board with April Housing and
Mhm.
Greystone, uh, Pass with Naveen, they no longer are buying one property. They are buying these large portfolios. And typically the general contractor organizations that are engaged with those organizations, they have an A list, right, of general contractors that they work with. And they put it on our lap, and we have to kind of powwow around the boardroom and put together a strategic plan on how do we bid this, how do we get out there and walk it, and that really starts from the very beginning before the closing even happens.
That makes sense, and that is interesting. That kind of change you've noted of, these folks doing these larger portfolios, and in some ways that's kind of more challenging, but also more opportunity to do more of this preservation work that's definitely needed. So that's very interesting as it has changed over time. So the rehabilitation process, it typically requires developers, general contractors, and some contractors working close together. What approaches have you seen be most effective in guaranteeing that that work gets done efficiently and productively, whenever you're entering into some of those contracts?
Day one, it's not a process of working with the developer where they bring us in after the fact of the closing, or even 6 months before the closing. It's really partnering with that developer from the very beginning, when that opportunity of an individual property or a portfolio of properties is an opportunity for that developer. They're bringing precision in on the very early stages of things, and walking the property, doing due diligence with those folks. um, but that's And I know we've heard a lot of the folks in this industry say that from a GC perspective, but the earlier the better that partnership that you mentioned is established, and we put together a strategic plan and critical timelines, the better. It just makes it a lot of rush work, if you will, when a GC is brought into the end, when everything is already done on the front, and then we actually get to the property and we begin peeling the onion. And as you can imagine, GCs can usually uncover a lot of things that are unforeseen by developers. And that's extremely important in staying within budget, to understand what the scopes of works will be, or any foreseen problems. Because believe it or not, a general contractor does not like the word change order neither. It creates headaches on all ends, and also throws budgets out of the mix, out of whack.
Definitely. I like the kind of peeling the onion metaphor, because sometimes we think about it as a group that does acquisitions but also new construction. New construction is extremely complicated, but in some ways it's like, okay, well, we know what it's going to be. Might have some complications around the site work or some things like that, but once you get up out of the ground, you kind of know what's going on there. Whereas with an acquisition, and when you're doing this reconstruction work, sometimes you don't know what you're gonna get. I'm sure you've seen a lot of different things. I was wondering if you could you maybe speak to some of the things that you've, especially as of lately, have been seeing whenever you've gotten onto these to these jobs. What sort of repairs are needed, what types of work would maybe the larger group not know, is out there in terms of the type of work that you're having to do whenever you get into these, these older assets that need a little love to stay habitable.
So I believe you're asking on kind of the scope of work line by
Hmm.
line that needs to be paid attention to.
Hmm.
Developers are very good at an eyeball approach, right? When they walk a
Yeah.
property, the opportunity on the front end. But really, what we like to focus on with the developer, just through our experience in the industry, is where we live. The ground moves daily, and that foundation work is something that really needs to be paid attention to, especially if we're going to be going in there and building a brand new product that's going to be, or a refurbished product that'll be sustainable for 15, 20 years. And you want to make sure that foundation is strong, because the last thing we want to do is build this pretty new building that's shiny for residents. And then 5 years down the road, the foundation's just falling apart and all the beautiful work that we conducted begins to crack, right? The other one, I think, kind of the unforeseen is not by the eyeball, is plumbing, right? From a total plumbing perspective, with pipes and making sure everything's run and cameraed, and really paying attention to that on the front end. And then also on the ADA side of things, Austin, right? I mean, that's something that is really microscoped in our line of work. And with those conversions that need to be able to be fluid when an ADA unit is needed for residents. So, it's not just roofs and gutters and exteriors and redoing the inside across the board. It's really getting down deep into that particular property and undercovering things that you can foresee within that 15, 20-year threshold that can become a real problem.
That makes a lot of sense, Trey. And it's very, good and smart, that y'all are having that level of focus on the front end, for some of those key items, that really can, impact, the quality of life of the resident, not just day one, but a few years down the road. Really trying to make it something that long term is sustainable and a great place to live. Could you, as we were preparing for the webinar, we were discussing acquisition rehabs. Can you describe kind of a little bit more about just the overall process there, particularly as it relates, on the affordable housing side, to doing these rehabs, but then also doing them in a way that you can renovate the properties, but you don't have to significantly raise the rents, for the residents?
That's something we do work with on the developers, on the rent raises. That's really out of our control as the general contractor, right?
Mhm.
But we know a budget typically that we work with on the very early end, with the developer that we need to be under.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of times the first number, it may not be where we need to be. So we
Mhm.
really need to go to the board as a team with developer, general contractor, and typically the housing authority can be engaged in that as well. And what other third parties that may be involved from a construction management perspective, and start the value engineering, right? We love that word, right, Austin? Value engineering. And basically what that
Definitely.
means is getting costs down, not substantially, but
Mhm.
where it makes sense, and we're staying within budget. And that really helps that particular owner developer when the product is ready, that we can keep those rents within a reasonable level.
Definitely. Yeah, Trey, I think that's so important, and understanding how to work through that value engineering process. Having a good trusted general contractor that's really a partner in the whole process is so key. Because on the affordable side, as opposed to the market rate side, it is a little different. You're not doing things just, to maybe sometimes on the market rate side, you're doing things more because it's in recent years, it's a predictable rent pop, and so you're doing some of those things, and whether or not it's, the long-term sustainability of the asset is maybe a different question, but the rent pop you can get and everything like that. Whereas on the affordable side, having a great, general contractor partner like yourself is so key, because you can kind of guide the developer or owner towards the types of renovations that are actually going to be long-term impactful, that allow the community to, not have huge operating issues down the road, so that the rents can remain affordable. And so you're really focused on those sustainability things, to really make sure that the community stays great. So it's so can't say enough about how important it is to
Sure.
have a
Yeah.
general contractor in
No,
that
and
process.
I agree, and it's, and it's not the affordable housing of, 20, 30 to 30 years ago, right? Like these
Yeah.
products that we're working with folks like Dominium, across the board, when these products are done, they look good, right?
Hmm.
They don't look like a military barrack, if you will, that is just very cut and dry and bare
Yeah.
minimum. There's a lot of beautiful communities out there, even from an older product, circa 40s, 50s, 60s, that have great bones, where we can come in, and that's my favorite part of the job, Austin, is when we go to a property and it's not in great shape, right?
Mm.
But we like to see that, because the rewarding part of it is when we take those before pictures, and
Yeah.
then we conduct all of our scopes of works from top to bottom, interior, exterior, across the board, and then we take our after picture and we put those side by side. Working with developers when we have a completed unit, especially on an interior side of things and exterior, with the
Hmm.
paint, can make a difference. And I'm able to shoot those texts over there live, and they can see the transformation,
Yep.
and they're amazed, right? Like, and that's what feels good when you have your customer, saying, "Wow, this looks fantastic," and also at the same time, and with precision, you know, affordable housing, reconstruction is really our bread and butter and flagship business. And that's why our feet hit the ground. We're of the stance where every person across the country, no matter what city or municipality you're in, they
Hmm.
deserve a nice place to live, to be proud of, and to call home. And sometimes to raise a family. And there's also multi generations within these households. And also, when we do a project and we're getting ready for construction, one thing we do love to do is to meet with the community up front.
Hmm.
And when we do that, we're hand in hand. We're talking to the existing residents that are there, and we're bringing in the samples. We're bringing in what the floor is going to look like, the appliances, the cabinetry, kind of the paint, and showing that product that will be, when the project is complete, to these residents. And the question they ask to me is typically is like, "This is going to be my house?" It's like, "Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. This is going to be your bright and shiny brand new house." And sometimes it brings out some of the waterworks, right? And they tear up a little bit. And that's really the big reason why we do what we do at Precision, is
Hmm.
producing that beautiful product for these residents that truly deserve it.
That's amazing. I'm sure that moment, must feel great, and get to do it so many times over and over is a great aspect of your business. Is there any particular community that when you think back over your career, you're like, wow, we really did our thing on that one, or we really any particular community that you really liked and really enjoyed, and maybe had a good story around the where it started to where it finished up.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of them. We've been fortunate to be in this business for a long time, and my brother and founder Ryan Curtis worked for a company that was local here before that, before starting Precision.
Mm.
But the DHA products that we've completed over the years, those have been fantastic turns, and that was 15 years ago. Now it's time for some of those products, to be reconstructed again and freshened up.
Yeah.
But one, it's not in Dallas, but it's in Lubbock,
Mhm.
and we walked that property around 2 years ago, and that project is midstream. And Austin, I'm sure you've been on some of these walks when they are still occupied,
Yep.
and uh, there's still a lot of work to be done when we see this. And that's where we take those before pictures. But seeing that project, which was in very older garden style community, with an extremely low occupancy rate of around
Mm.
30%, which is
Wow.
a nightmare, right, for an owner,
Yeah.
developer, operator. And coming back in and seeing a transformation of a property, not only on the exterior from a curb level appeal, but showing that interior with all new appliances, all new cabinets, all new flooring, new fixtures, new lighting, and I mean it's just night and day, And these apartments now that we're building within affordable housing, and I didn't live in very nice apartments, right, when I was in college, but I mean these places are nicer than when I lived in college, and after college, and it feels very good to see that transformation, Austin.
That's great. That's I love that you hit on also, something maybe that was lower in occupancy. So and able to potentially get higher in occupancy now. So you're really, renovating communities, but also just making some place that maybe wasn't really livable or attractive to live, a now happy home for a lot more people. So that's really tangible, really amazing work.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what broad policy changes, rehabilitation plans, partnerships, or investments do you see as essential towards improving the reconstruction process and availability of attainable housing in North Texas? Very much a broad question. You can take it any direction you want to go, but what sort of initiatives are needed to improve this process in North Texas in our region?
Oh, Austin, I don't know if we have enough time for that. We could be on here for hours. But, it's something, just to answer your question from a general perspective, it's something as an organization, even as a GC, not being a developer or owner, that we do need to pay very close attention to, right? They're ever changing. It seems like they change every year. And also, something to take into perspective, to take into note is, you know, these developers are asked to do, and housing authorities are asked to do more and more and more every year with less money,
Mm,
and that can be a problem. So, and that's why, we do stay very close to the market and as a whole,
mhm.
and participating in organizations like DHC and TAP, and supporting the housing authorities across the country. From a GC perspective, it is truly to be a part of the community and the communities that we rehab and are a part of. You really have to keep your ear to the ground, right? Because that can go back into the value engineering for these developers when you go to the table, and a GC that has a lot of experience in this can look through these proposals that may be already baked and go back and look through them to make sure that we are paying attention to these policies that are effective today, because what is effective today, it may not have been effective or in policy just simply, a matter of months ago or a year ago. It's ever changing, and these folks are asked to do more and more every year with less money, and that can be challenging, right? But you have to be creative, you have to stay in tune, you have to keep your finger on the pulse, and that's something that Precision has done very well. And we're part of this community. We love affordable housing. We support all the organizations, and we have to be in tune in order to support our customers to deliver on what they need from an affordable housing rehabilitation.
Certainly, Trey. I'm the developer in me really really appreciates you mentioning that dynamic of the ask and the need and just what has to happen is growing, but the sources of funds to support that work sometimes are shrinking. And so having a good GC to not only be cognizant of that dynamic, but then have some strategies to combat it, is so helpful. So yeah, I definitely appreciate you being a part of the community because it's important work. So before we wrap up here, is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with today?
No, first of all, thank you for the time and inviting me. I love being part of it. As you said, we are part of this community. We are all in, if you will. It's as we see everything that's happening specifically within our Dallas market. And, the next time that you hear about a brand new shiny apartment complex going up, and ask the question, well, what happened to the older one?
Mm,
Because that building that was naturally affordable in the past may not be on that land any longer. And
yeah.
that's a big part of the story, right? Austin is eliminating those numbers of units that were an affordable property. They get leveled and turned to a market rate product.
Yep.
That's the struggle where we're trying to fulfill that need of a shortage of affordable housing for communities and the people that live in them.
Definitely. Yeah, no, the preservation piece is so key, and it is something that we all need to think about, because and the other thing too, new construction timelines, it's a few years before any of those units get built, and so if we have units here today, right now, that are affordable, but maybe not livable, that's something that maybe through some reconstruction, through some preservation actions, we can get those units up online, very, very quickly,
Right.
and families living in them today.
And we get super creative, right? There's all sorts of stuff that's being converted into affordable housing these days. It's amazing what we're doing out there in regards to continuing to provide these units. And I mean, new construction has to happen, right? There's no doubt about that. But to your point, exactly, to be fluid and speed to market, these rehab products are something that can fill those gaps of the shortage.
Definitely, definitely. All these strategies are needed. It's not one or the other. It's really all of them.
100%.
Definitely. So, Trey, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really value your perspective and really appreciate you coming on and speaking with us.
Of course, Austin. See you guys next week or next month in TAP, I'm sure. So
Yes,
we'll
certainly. We'll see a lot of folks at TAP down there in Austin in July. Um, well, so great. So before we sign off today, we'd like to remind our audience members to join us at the unveiling of the Dallas Housing History and Zoning Legacy Project at 5. It's going to be from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Thursday, July 23rd at Life in Deep Ellum. Please also follow our social media for more updates and to stay connected with our Housing for All webinar series. Please also visit DallasHousingCoalition.com to subscribe to our communications and become a member of the coalition today. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in to the 69th Housing for All webinar. We will see you back here next week for the 70th episode with Charla Myers, CEO of the Community Council of Greater Dallas. Have a great weekend and happy Juneteenth, everyone.